Conservatives are cheering President Trump's federal law enforcement surge into big cities that are being overrun with crime, while Democratic politicians are crying foul. Is this a simple case of left versus right, or is there something more that we should be concerned about? We'll answer that in this episode of Analysis Behind the News, where we provide the perspective that you can use to restore American liberty and independence. Last week, President Trump introduced Operation Legend in a speech from the White House. He explained the basis of the plan by stating,
"In recent weeks, there has been a radical movement to defund, dismantle, and dissolve our police departments. Extreme politicians have joined this anti-police crusade and relentlessly vilified our law enforcement heroes. To look at it from any standpoint, the effort to shut down policing in their own communities has led to a shocking explosion of shootings, killings, murders, and heinous crimes of violence."
Before we go any further to reveal the details of Operation Legend, let's remark about the current situation of these cities. The crime rates are a direct reflection of the policies of local elected officials. Many of these cities' administrators have symbolically shown support for the recent protests that have turned into riots. They have also created an environment that coddles instead of punishes the guilty. Seattle has seen its autonomous zone. Minneapolis saw millions of dollars of property damage due to arson, looting, and vandalism. Portland is going on 2 months of nightly rioting. Chicago's weekend shootings and subsequent killings continue to set record highs. The more problems that are created with this violence, the more money is proposed to throw at the situation by these elected officials. While the current mantra is to defund the police, that money is not money saved, but diverted into other local government agencies. Of course, less police will equal more crime and more problems, which means more funds to be devoted to solutions that don't work. Do you see the circular effect here? To boil it down, the scenario has been set to create additional dependency upon government at all levels. Many decades ago, it was well known to most Americans that a strategy of communists is to grow the size of government until it is a central government of planning and control. Operation Legend lends itself to this because those that refuse to keep law and order set up the scenario that leads to sending in the federal government in some way, fashion, or form. Unfortunately, President Trump recently announced a surge of federal law enforcement into American communities plagued by violent crime. This law enforcement includes agents from the FBI, ATF, DEA, U.S. Marshals Service, and Homeland Security. According to U.S. Attorney General William Barr, more than 200 federal agents have been sent to Kansas City, while others are also being sent to Chicago and Albuquerque. News reports also indicate that agents were sent to Portland and are going to be sent to Milwaukee. Mr. Barr said that these agents are part of joint anti-violent crime task forces. He said,
"It's important to stress that the operations we're talking about are the standard anti-crime fighting activities we have been carrying out around the country for decades. We will be adding federal agents to the task forces. These are street agents, they're investigators who will be working to solve murders and to take down the violent gangs, and they'll be working shoulder to shoulder with our state and local colleagues. This is a different kind of operation, obviously, than the tactical teams we use to defend against riots and mob violence. And we're going to continue to confront mob violence. But the operations we're discussing today are very different. They are classic crime fighting."
With that in mind, we must place law enforcement in some further context, and Acting Secretary of the DHS, Chad Wolf, did so during the news conference. He said,
"In the wake of 9/11, DHS was founded so that the federal government could better partner directly with state and local law enforcement.
As we all know, government utilizes crises to its advantage as much as it can. 9/11 provided an excuse to centralize an extraordinary amount of power inside the federal government, furthering efforts to take away intelligence responsibility from local police. In all fairness, Mr. Wolf did make a distinction between their mission in Portland versus Operation Legend. He said,
"The DHS mission in Portland is to protect federal property and our law enforcement officers. In Chicago, the mission is to protect the public from violent crime on the streets. Leaders of these great cities should not stand behind the status quo. They should stand with America. They should condemn these violent attacks, and they should work with this administration and this president to bring about law and order."
For those interested in law and order, let's highlight a few things in his remarks before we start cheering him on. He is 100% correct about not accepting the status quo, but that's about it. The federal government does not have a responsibility to clean up local and state messes created by local leaders. The local electorate is directly responsible for the leadership of their elected officials. These leaders are directly accountable to the communities they serve. To have the federal government even assist in these efforts allows the feds to gain a foothold in areas that they should not be, no matter who the president is. Why? Because the end result is the nationalization of the local police. Police who are tasked with carrying out the agenda of a central government instead of serving local communities. In the July 6, 2020 special report on what's really behind the riots from the New American magazine, University instructor of history and government Steve Bias wrote, "Neither history nor logic supports the position that police misbehavior would be reduced if the badge and officer wore said U.S. Police rather than Minneapolis Police. In fact, it should be self-evident that centralization of police power and removing that power from the local level to the control of distant politicians would automatically lead to more politicization, corruption, and oppression, as there would be almost no influence of the public on their local police." Fully aware of that principle, America's founders wisely placed policing powers in the hands of state and local governments. In many countries with nationalized police forces, the liberties of the people are regularly ignored. In fact, the goal of a national police force is exactly what revolutionary leftists have wanted throughout the centuries. Why? Because it's easier to control the people with officials whose allegiance lie with the state than with those within local communities. Karl Marx, co-author of the Communist Manifesto, once wrote, "The police, the judiciary, and the administration are not the representatives of a civil society which administers its own universal interests in them and through them. They are the representatives of the state, and their task is to administer the state against civil society." This is one aspect that many Americans miss. Actions have consequences, and most of the time are part of an agenda that diminishes American liberty and independence. So with that, we ask that you please share Mr. Bias's article with others on social media, as well as getting the entire issue of the special report and handing that out to help keep our local police independent of federal control. Links are in the video description. I'm Bill Hahn for the John Birch Society, and until next time, stay informed, stay active, and of course, stay safe, Patriots.